So I'm starting the stream now, and I'm going to make sure that it is going well. Let's see here, live stream. Okay. And of course, I'm going to have to maneuver like 5 or 6 things because I also have to keep an eye on the chat. Because the last couple of times I did this, I completely ignored the chat. So I apologize, chat. But yeah, we're here chatting about Pink Floyd, and I have a very special guest with me today. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, if you don't know me, my channel is Niamh the Prog Nerd. I do a lot of things about prog every other day or so, and yeah, that's really it. Talk about prog for a living.
Which I think is the dream job for most of us.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And I will let everybody know that there might be just a slight delay in the audio on Niamh's side as well as the visuals. It's, the limitations of technology that we have at the moment, but rest assured it's all one person. And if you haven't already, definitely go and subscribe to her channel because she's just blowing everybody out of the water. I love all of your commentaries, all of your. In fact, you've inspired me to do more vinyl community stuff. Because before I'm like,
Oh
no,
great.
nobody wants to hear about my vinyl collection, but apparently people do. So, yeah, I'm working on a my own record tag that I hope to put out on Friday.
Ooh,
So,
I would be participating.
yeah, so if anybody else wants to do that, half of the reason why I'm doing these is just to see what other people have in their community and their own vinyls. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's why I did it because I was just so interested in what other people had to answer with my one.
Yeah. So, if you haven't already, just go on over and click a quick subscribe and a like and all that fun stuff to Niamh's channel. But we're going to get into chatting about all of Pink Floyd's studio albums today and kind of putting them through the ranking list and just have a nice conversation about all that. So, yeah, I think we can just start off. Like, I know both of us love Pink Floyd. Do you want to chat a little bit about, like, how you got into Pink Floyd and yeah,
Sure,
yeah.
yeah. It was a good like 5 or so years ago. I was listening to an album by I don't remember who it was, but my dad pointed out that it sounded like a track called Echoes by Pink Floyd, and I was like, I don't know who Pink Floyd are. Are they the one with the triangle and the thing? And he was like, Yeah, that's them. Um, and I was like 14 at the time, so I'd never really listened to anything that was longer than 7 minutes. So we sat down in our front room and he played me Echoes, and this went on for like 23 minutes. I was like, why is this song so long? This is unnecessarily long. But I grew to love it so much, and that was my introduction to Pink Floyd, and ever since I've loved them.
Yeah, mine was very, very similar. I mean, just with my own father, very similar. My dad introduced me to them. He got a box set. I think it was the Shine On box set. It's the one that has like the people with the water spout kind of
Oh, yeah.
circling them. So he got that when I was young and just played all the records and all the CDs from that. And I just fell in love with them ever since. I think I can't even remember the first time I sat down to listen to any of them. But like Dark Side of the Moon, my dad always played metal because that was always his favorite.
Yeah, that was my dad's favorite as well. Yeah.
Yep, yep. And yeah, so I just kind of grew up with them myself, and they slowly became my one of my favorite ones as well. So let's start ranking these guys.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so we've got a couple tiers here. We'll go chronologically with their first one, which is Piper at the Gates of Dawn. And we have S as being like superior, like this is like a pantheon type of an album,
Yeah.
and then the rest is just kind of like school gradings from A to F. So with a debut album like Piper, this is their more psychedelic stuff with Sid Barrett. So I'm
Yeah.
interested to see where you would put Piper at the Gates of Dawn.
I mean, it's a great album, but it's one that I'm less familiar with because my Pink Floyd era that I'm the most familiar with is from probably around like Atom Heart Mother to probably about Animals. But I have listened to Piper and I do love it. But I'd probably rank it as a B
Mm-hmm.
purely because I just need more time to get into it. I do love the psychedelic sound, but I'm just more into the Pink Floyd that's more longer tracks, more progressive, more jam orientated music than the more psychedelic-y pop music. And I do love that. And I love that album, as I said, but I wouldn't rank it any higher just yet because it's one I'm not familiar with.
Yeah, I'm really in the same boat. Piper for me is, I would even put it at a C, but I'll split the difference and put it in a B category in the same kind of way. It's like I feel like they're riding the coattails a little too heavily of the psychedelics, even if they're one of the more pioneer bands. I don't return to this one nearly as much as I do all their other ones.
Oh yeah, so
Um,
yeah,
but I still think that there's enough on here like Astrodomi and there's a few other tracks that I go back to that even they as a band will play every once in a while. But yeah, it's not one that I return to all that often.
yeah. I've listened to it only a few times. I haven't really gone back to it since.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Moving on though, because I don't want to spend too much time on some of these earlier albums because I think we can have a better conversation about some of their later ones.
Yeah.
We go on to Saucer Full of Secrets, their sophomore album.
That is one of my favorite Pink Floyd albums
Mm-hmm.
at the moment. That's an A tier for
An
me.
A
That is
tier.
just such a beautiful record. It just starts so strong and then just finishes so strong. And it's a great progression from their first album. It's so different in a weird way. It's like it's still got the psychedelic undertones, but it's more progressing and more jam orientated. I mean, Source Full of Secrets, the title track, is just like that first like 7 or so minutes is just odd jamming, and it goes into the more melodic section. So I'd probably rank it as an A.
Yeah, I definitely say that it is a jump in quality, and I put it in an A as well. It is one of my favorites, especially with that title track. We Need More Light starting everything off with that like
Oh,
really poppin'
so
bass work that then just kind of goes into a very mellow, almost like a hypnotic wave.
yeah,
Um, I think the quality jump where they still have their roots in the psychedelia, but they are starting to transition more into like this proggy side of things. So
oh yeah, definitely.
I'm definitely with you in terms of that jump in quality. I definitely return to this one a lot more than I would their first album.
I agreed, 100%.
Perfect. We are just blasting right along here. Let's go to more. Um, yeah. What do you have to say about more the soundtrack?
Again, it's one that's I'm not as familiar with. I've only heard it, I'd say, a couple of times, but from what I remember of hearing it, I just remember it being just so beautiful and so beautifully written. Um, I
Mm-hmm.
mean, as I said, I don't really know as much about it, but it is just really nice, mellow one that I kind of sit and relax to a lot.
Yeah, I agree in that it's beautiful, but it's not tangible. Like I've listened to it maybe a dozen or so times, and each time I don't feel anything about it. Like,
Yeah,
yeah,
I'm with you there. I mean, I think from what I remember listening to it, I think only a couple of tracks really kind of stood out to me.
yeah. So for me, as much as it pains me, I do want to put this more into like the D category, only
Yeah, that's where
because,
I put it.
yeah, only because it's there's I don't know. Every time I talk about Pink Floyd's discography as a whole, I always have to like sit down and listen to more and think, okay, what else can I talk about?
Mm,
Because it's just,
yeah.
yeah. But this kind of brings us to a divisive album. Um, so we can talk a little bit about Amagama, which is,
That's a bit of a controversial one for people.
because like I want to stick to just chatting about the studio side of things, even though the live disc that's on here is so good.
Oh yeah,
It's
mind blowingly amazing.
oh yeah, I used to listen to the rendition of Saucer Full of Secrets on this one and just like lose myself.
Yeah,
I think that
yeah.
they improve upon everything from a studio release, which is what you need when you do a live album, I think.
Oh yeah, 100%. I like when bands will take their studio version and possibly extend it, add bits and pieces that you don't hear in the studio.
Exactly. Yeah, and like I always thought, what's the point of playing it live? Like it's fine if you play it live, but like to have a live recording where it's almost a carbon copy of the studio release, I never, I never got the point of that. It's just a
Yeah,
compilation album at that point.
I agree. I mean, I kind of grew up when I was younger with the live version of Amagama. I mean, my dad used
Hmm.
to play Careful with That Axe Eugene from that album
Yep.
so many times, and I loved it to death. And it only took me a few years to actually realize that there was a studio part of that album,
Hmm. Hmm.
which I wasn't familiar with for a long time. And I listened to it, I was like, it's all right. I've heard better Pink Floyd, which is going to come later, but I ranked it a C
A C.
because the album, the live section, spot on.
Hmm.
Maybe not so much on the studio. It's okay. It's listenable, but
Yeah, there's a few moments within the studio works that I'm just like, oh, this is not like this is some of their worst music. But I think it's the narrow gap, the narrow way. It's the narrow way, the David Gilmour stuff.
yeah,
Part three of that is like it shouldn't be that good. Um, like I remember listening to it for the first couple of times in preparation for like a worst to best video and this one, and I keep getting reminded of just how beautiful that track is, and I'm like, it's surrounded by all this like experimental strangeness
yeah.
that I'm not too thrilled about. That here's this beautiful beautiful song that I have to wade through so much weirdness to get to.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I haven't heard it in a long time, but I think it's all right. It's listenable.
Yeah,
There are some really, really good moments on it. But
yeah.
I think it's outshone by the live section.
I agree. I agree. Yeah, I mean the live section alone is enough to pick up this album, and then the studio stuff is just kind of it's there if you want to listen to
Yeah,
it. Yeah. All right. So I know I'm going to have a little bit of a discussion about the next album, which is Adam Hart Mother.
such a great album.
Oh
Such a
man.
great album.
Yeah. So for me, this one is an S. This is a superior album. This still is my favorite Pink Floyd album out of their entire discography.
Understandable. That's fantastic.
And I know a lot of people aren't a big fan of this. I've been criticized many a times, saying that even the band doesn't really like this album. But for me, this one is like a top tier S. The title track. I even love Alan's Psychedelic Breakfast. I love where it
Yeah, it
goes.
just works. It
It
just works with the album.
it does. It does.
Yeah.
I love it so much. Like I love the three different passages of it, and that final passage is so beautiful. And I love all the smaller ones, like all the smaller tracks, like Summer of. I always say it's Summer of '69, but I think it's Summer of '64. If and oh, what's the David Gilmour track on it? I always want to say it's What's the Deal, but that's from Obscured by
That's what's
Cloud.
good. Yeah.
Yeah, they're all perfect for me.
Yeah, for me it's an A because I mean my favorites come later on, but it's every track I do love. It's just this one took me a really long time to get into. When I was younger and I was first getting into Pink Floyd, I wouldn't actually listen to the entirety of the Atom Heart Mother Suite because I was like, this is it's too weird. So I'd always skip to one very very specific section of the song. I listen to it all in its entirety more these days, but there's one specific part that's just it sends shivers every time. It's I think it's like the second section of the big track.
Hmm.
It's just amazing. Rick Wright,
Oh
oh,
yeah,
so good.
yeah. Okay, so this is. I think this might be the first time that we are splitting between an S and an A. Um, I recognize that my bias towards this album overshines it for being an S, but I can concede and put it in an A. Because I do recognize that my own personal bias towards this album might not necessarily shine the quality of this album completely. So, yeah. So I think we can either go to Relics or Metal because they were both released in 1971.
I'm alright with either.
Okay.
Yeah, I love both of them. I know which one I prefer.
Oh, same here, same here. So let's talk about the fan favorite of Metal first.
Oh, that was like the first full Pink Floyd album I ever heard was Metal. Surprisingly, not Dark Side of the Moon. It was Metal that solidified my love of Pink Floyd because my dad loved it so much and he'd play it all the time. Just One of These Days is just one of the best songs ever. It's just so cool. It's such a cool song, and it's almost completely instrumental. And Pillow wins everything. It's an A for me because there's like a couple of tracks that I love them. I love them to death, but as a whole album, I'd put it a little bit lower. But Echoes and everything like that, it's really, really, really good.
Yeah. For me, I want to put this in S, but I do agree that much like Atom Heart Mother, where you have those stand out, massive, big tracks, either starting or ending the track, and then having a beautiful either closer, mainly instrumental closer or opener, I feel like some of those mid tracks doesn't quite hit as hard. So when I'm looking at like a full album, like from start to finish,
Yeah.
it's a beautiful album, and I think you are quite right, and I will agree that it's an A, even though I want to give it an S. And if you had suggested S, I wouldn't have argued with you. But yeah, I think that there's and you were quite right in like a full album. There is a little bit of a dip, and I want to reserve the S category for those that don't have that kind of dip in the center.
Oh yeah, absolutely. For me, in S tier, it's very rare that I'm like, this is a 10 out of 10 album, because I gotta love every single song. I will listen to every single song and not kind of go skip.
Exactly. Yeah. And every single song has to be perfect, which is so hard. Like, and that's the thing. Like Atom Heart Mother and Metal, even though I love and I'll sit down and love the entire album, I will be one of the first to admit that there are a few songs on there that aren't perfect.
Yeah. S tier 100% has to be all perfect.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay, let's move on to Relics then. Their kind of compilation of a couple, like a lot of their tracks that they had been recording and releasing when Syd Barrett was still in the band and never really found Perch. I debated even including it in the tier list because it's not technically a studio album of theirs. It's more of a compilation. But I figured might as well. A lot of people still talk about it, and a lot of people still have very fond memories of it. And you would have an incomplete studio record collection if you didn't have Relics in it.
Oh yeah, it's a completer. You gotta have it.
Yeah, for me, this is along the same quality of like Piper at the Gates of Dawn. I feel like it doesn't quite have that same level of experimentation that works that, say, the studio stuff from Amagama or all of Saucer Full of Secrets. Now, that's not to say that the tracks on here are bad. I still really, really like them. But it's more of a, I guess the best way to put it is like a really good B-side to most of the other tracks.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah, where would you put Relics?
I'd probably put it in the same place. I mean, I remember I got it as a gift from my dad for Father's Day one year, and I listened to it and I didn't really like it because it has the studio version of Careful with That Eugene on it. I was like, that's just better as the live version. I found it quite hard to actually listen through the whole studio version because I was like, no, it just doesn't. It doesn't have the same energy, I guess.
I agree. Yeah,
the live one.
The live version has such a punch. There's such a big energy to it. So I would put this one more in a C category.
I'm with you then. Yeah.
Right alongside Amagama. And now we come to another kind of divisive album that kind of gets overlooked, which is Obscured by Clouds.
Yeah, it's one that doesn't get talked about enough because it's just so wonderful. It's really great. I mean, I put it as B because it's another one that I'm not as familiar with, but What's the Deal? It's such a great song. It's so beautiful.
I agree. What's the Deal is one of my all-time favorites, and I'm saddened that David Gilmour doesn't play it more in his solo sets. And I just, there's so many, like, the ideas on this album are beautiful and brilliant, and I think, and you might need to correct me if I'm wrong here, but I believe on the Live in Pompeii movie, they talk a little bit of Obscured by Clouds and saying how it would have been a much better album if they had more time in the studio to rework and perfect some of the ideas and tracks that they had on it. So yeah, I love a lot of moments on it, and I would agree that it's sorely overlooked and it does deserve to be talked about, but I would put it in a B category as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, now we're moving on to we're speeding through.
Going into the heavyweights now.
Now we're talking about the heavyweights, where I think the bulk of the conversation will take place.
It's gonna get more interesting now, hopefully.
We've kind of done past all the early years, and we're coming to those albums that really made Pink Floyd the household name, and the first one being Dark Side of the Moon.
It's a great album, don't get me wrong. It's fantastic, it's revolutionary, it's groundbreaking, and was a big step in the progression of music. But I can't help but think that it's not their best work.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's fabulous. It's a great album. I'll listen to it start to finish and think, wow, 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 great album. But I can't. I put it as an A again. It's just. I think it's a. I think people will hate me for saying this, but I think it's just a little bit tad overrated in comparison to a lot of the other Pink Floyd stuff that I think is miles better.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat, honestly. I agree with you 100% in that it's not their best work, and I do think it's a little too overhyped. That's not to say that it's a bad album. It's still one of their
Oh
best
yeah, no, it's
albums.
fabulous.
I still want to put it in the S category only because of the notoriety and the amount of crossover fans that this album brought them, and the progressive rock genre as a whole. I do agree that some of the concepts on this are a little bit stretched thin, but I can't help but put this in S. This is an S one for me.
Oh, absolutely fair enough. It's fantastic. I mean, Us and Them is one of my favorite songs of all time.
Yeah, Us. I
Got
love.
me through so much stuff at school, and it's just fabulous album. But when I sat down and started listening to Pink Floyd properly and was listening to more of the chunky, big albums of theirs, I just thought, well, these must just bit better, a bit better.
I 100% agree, and I'm so glad that we're on the same page in that sense because yeah, like in terms of their like the musicianship, the lyrics, the concepts, the actual songs themselves, they've gone on to do so much better than this album. But there's just some like Great Gig in the Sky and Us and Them. But I still love a lot of those smaller moments, like on Any Color You Like, and I always forget the second or third track, depending on what version of this album you have. What's that? What's that title? This is going to bug me. It's gone. It's the one after Breathe.
I know what you're talking
Where
about.
it's that loop. And yeah, for me, I have to put it in an S category. But yeah, I 100% agree that they've done. It's On the Run. Thank you, Mr. Crinkle. That was going to bug me. Yeah, they've done better. But I can't give it anything lower than an S, unfortunately.
No, it's fabulous. It is good.
Okay, now we can move on to Wish You Were Here.
I only realised how great this album was very recently. It's an S 100%. Every single song on that album is stunning. I listen to this one so much at the moment because I've really gotten to love this album so much more. I mean, I overlooked things like Have a Cigar and Welcome to the Machine and stuff like that because I obviously knew Shine On You Crazy Diamond and Wish You Were Here, but those two tracks are probably my favourites on the album now because I've listened to them so much and realised how good they are, and I just think every song on this album, flawless. It's just absolutely amazing.
Yeah, this is like when we were talking about metal and My Heart Mother, this was the album that I had in mind because every single track on this is perfect. And yeah, much like you, I knew Wish You Were Here because they would play it on the radio and they would play it all the time. I also love the bookends, the whole, like, whatever it comes out to, like 23 minutes or 27 minutes, depending. That whole Wish You Were Here suite that has gone on to inspire so many others, like after them. it is a perfect album, and I love the concept of this album a little bit more.
Yeah.
And I love the whole concept of like the record industry and how it can destroy somebody, and how it's one of the first to kind of tackle that, because I mean it's a concept that's been kind of drilled into the ground at this point. But at the time, talking negatively against the record industry was like almost unheard of.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I mean, I just love how it's dedicated to Sid Barrett as well.
Mm-hmm.
They're still reflecting on someone who was an important part of their creation.
Yeah, yeah, and I love that. Like I love how the beautiful, like such a beautiful work of music is really in honor of one of their founding members is such
Yeah,
a good thing. So, yeah, and it's an absolute S. Yeah, there's no way that it can't be.
it's amazing.
Okay, over to Animals, the one that, yeah, what, the if you're a fan of Pink Floyd, I think this is like top tier. But I find if you're, it's it's a little bit of a shame that Animals doesn't get the same kind of love by the mass populace as a lot of the other albums do, mainly
Oh, I agree.
because there's not really a main single leading this. Like Wish You Were Here had Wish You Were Here, Dark Side of the Moon had Time and Money, but there wasn't really a radio friendly track off of this one.
Yeah, it's my favorite Pink Floyd album,
Mm-hmm.
and it's S plus plus plus. It's just their
Mm-hmm.
best album ever, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
I like to describe it. I was talking to someone about this recently as a really good sandwich, because it's
Mm-hmm.
got Pigs on the Wing Part One and Two that open and close the album, and then you've got the middle section, which is just the really good meaty part of the album. There
Mm-hmm.
is nothing wrong with this album. It's just completely brilliant.
Yeah.
I've love the lyrics. The first time I ever heard it was I borrowed a vinyl copy from a friend. Her dad's really into prog, so I just borrowed it from him. And
Mm-hmm.
I sat in my room and I just was reading the lyric sheet, and I was like, this is just really good. Like
Mm-hmm.
you can't
Mm-hmm.
really get much better than this.
Yeah.
So it's remained my favorite Pink Floyd album ever since that moment.
Yeah, this is, and it always fluctuates rather like if it's my second or my third favorite album next to Adam Hart Mother. But yeah, this album really, like, the more you listen to it, the more you get out of it. And it was, each of their albums in their own way is a very brave album. Like, starting off Wish You Were Here with this, almost 3 minute, very soundscapey synth soundscape. And then this one having what dogs being 17 minutes or something along those lines.
Yeah,
Like back in, I just need to move that over again. Having like a 17-minute track at, when this thing was released, like progressive rock was kind of like turned like snubbed in the
yeah.
general populace. Like punk was really coming in and like saying how horrible progressive rock was, and so these, like, I feel like this is almost a backlash to the backlash for progressive rock in some cases.
Oh yeah, definitely. I definitely get that vibe in it.
Yeah, like it's a very dark, and I always say that this album has teeth. Like it's a very like
Mm,
sharp
yeah.
album. Yeah, for me, I agree 100%. It's an S. It's probably, if I'm being non-subjective, like if I'm leaving my bias at the door, it is Pink Floyd's best work. So yeah, it's absolutely an S.
Yeah, it's some of my favorite Roger Waters songwriting. It's just so fantastic.
Yeah, and actually, that is a perfect point because I love this album for the marriage between Roger Waters' songwriting ship with David Gilmour's musicianship.
Yeah, it
And
was just the perfect blend.
it's the perfect blend. And I think that's a really good segue for us to chat about The Wall. Because I'm genuinely interested to hear your thoughts about The Wall.
It was one that I was very late to because it was so long. So I was like, oh, this has taken me a while to listen to. I've listened to it a couple of times ever since. I don't think a lot of people rate this album really highly, but I I don't really rate it as highly as some people. I mean, the concept's great,
Mm-hmm.
you know, but I don't know. It's a little bit. I'm gonna get haters. Too self-indulgent. A
Mm-hmm.
little bit of Roger Waters saying, "I love me. Look at me."
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
so I ranked it a B because it's got some really great stuff on it. Some really good like hidden stuff. I mean, everyone's always talking about Another Brick in the Wall Part Two,
Mm-hmm.
Comfortably Numb,
Mm-hmm.
but Another Brick in the Wall Part Three. It's a minute and a bit, but it is one of the best things on that album.
Yeah, yeah, and I'm with you 100%, and I'm so happy that you're saying all these things because I will endorse it 100%. And speaking about Another Brick in the Wall Part 3, the Roger Waters live album that he put out last year has Greatest Days of Our Lives going right into Another Brick in the Wall Part 2, and then goes straight into Another Brick in the Wall Part 3. And it reminds everybody how brilliant and beautiful Another Brick in the Wall Part 3 is. And
Yeah, it's just so raw. It's
mm-hmm,
just so great.
yeah, and I'm also with you in terms of like the concept, and I've gone back and forth with this album in terms of like my enjoyment level because I've never really loved this album as much as so many other people have.
Yeah, I agree.
And for me, the songs that I loved are the ones that a lot of people don't really talk about, which is like my favorite track off of this is Nobody's Home,
Oh, it's
which
great.
is maybe Rick White's only like moment on this album, and I don't even
Yeah,
know if it's him playing the piano. Like it could just be Roger Waters playing the piano for him. But
someone should win.
yeah, exactly. But it's like the only moment where we get any kind of keyboards on this album. And I also love the trial, the big self examination, this lying naked on the floor and having all of your negative attributes being scrutinized. I mean, I was getting into this album pretty heavily when I was a teenager, and I was like, wow, this is like I can see myself in this.
Yeah,
But I don't know if it's quite aged with me as well. Like I agree with your stance of it's probably just a overly self-indulgent Roger Waters airing out his own traumas. Which, hey man, you do you. You know,
yeah, absolutely.
yeah, no shade in that sense. But I do want to remind Roger Waters that this is still a Pink Floyd project and not a Roger Waters project.
And
So.
that will probably lead into the next.
It sure will. It 100% will. So I agree. I'm putting it in the B category. I know a lot of people are going to be saddened about that, but I think we're both in agreement that it deserves to be in the
It's
B.
funny because all the people I know who have opinions on the wall either really like it or just don't care for it.
Mm-hmm.
Like me and my boyfriend were like, yeah, it's good, but my dad just really just doesn't care for it
Yeah.
whatsoever. He's just saying, yeah, my Pink Floyd era cuts off after Animals. After that, it's too much Roger for me to handle.
Yep, yep. My dad is in the exact same category. He's like, yeah, for me, Pink Floyd stopped with Animals and then started up again with Division Bell.
Oh, okay,
So,
yeah.
yeah, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. So, if we want to talk about self-indulgence for Roger Waters,
I
let's...
think this album, Final Cut, should just be called just the Roger Waters
Mm-hmm,
album.
mm-hmm.
I mean, I haven't listened to it in a very long time. I think I've only ever heard it once or twice. It's all right. I wouldn't really rank it much higher than a C or a D or a C.
Yeah,
Um,
I'm with you in that sense. It is really a Roger Waters featuring David Gilmour and Nick Mason, because at that point, Rick White was like, I'm either he was fired or he left. Either way, he
I
wasn't.
think he was fired by Roger.
Yeah, like from what I hear, like I think it was a mutual thing. It was one of those "you're fired, you can't fire me, I quit" kind of an idea. But
Oh,
yeah, I remember when I first got into the Final Cut, and I actually liked it a lot more than The Wall,
mm,
only because I felt like it was a little bit more visceral. It was a little bit more like it wasn't afraid to be what it was. Where I always felt like The Wall was a little bit too afraid to go all in. This one went completely all in, and what I really love about this album is the studio mastering and the production work on it.
Oh, production's fabulous.
It's probably
Amazing.
their best produced album. With if you listen to it on a really good pair of headphones, it has like this cross wave going on where it starts in like the front right and will fade into the back left.
Yeah.
It's so really trippy when you're listening to it with headphones on. But yeah, in terms of the actual track, the only ones that really stand out for me is the Fletcher Memorial Home with David Gilmour's playing style. Because again, talking about that marriage between David Gilmour's musicianship and Roger Waters' writing, that's the only time when those two kind of came together.
Yeah.
Everything else on this is very much the Roger Waters show.
Yeah, it's look at me, I'm Roger. I can write concept albums.
Yeah. You didn't. Yeah. So I have no problem putting this in like the C or D category.
Yeah, it's not my favorite. I'm not as familiar with it, but from what I remember, it's just nothing really beats the mid-70s Pink Floyd era.
Yeah. So if this was the Roger Waters show, as much as it pains me to say, I think the next album is kind of the David Gilmour show.
Oh, yeah, 100%.
Yeah, the Momentary Lapse of Reason, the one that caused a massive debate between our boys. In fact, a lot of people don't even consider this to be a Pink Floyd album, which I think is funny when they consider like the Final Cut to be a Pink Floyd album.
Yeah, I mean, this one I don't actually think I've listened to in its entirety properly, but I've listened to bits and pieces, and it's okay. I wouldn't put it higher than a D or C again, but that's because I'm not as familiar with it. So yeah, I haven't really got as many opinions on this one.
Yeah, for me, the main saving grace, because I've been listening to this one a lot more recently, mainly with the reissue of Delicate Sound of Thunder, and I've grown to appreciate and like this album a lot more. I mean, I've listened to a lot of the singles because the radio station that I grew up listening to would play like Learning to Fly and On the Turning Away quite regularly in their roster. So I have like a really special place in my heart for this album. But like you, I wouldn't put it any higher than a B or a C. And I would feel okay with it being in the C category.
Yeah, I gotta visit that one at some point.
Like it's a grower, but I wouldn't necessarily really recommend it. It's more of like if you like David Gilmour's stuff in the 80s, like with his first two solo stuff, and you want more of that, then go and check it out, because even the last track of Sorrow is quite beautiful.
Yeah, I think I've only ever listened to one David Gilmour solo project.
His last two are brilliant, like On an Island and Rattle That Lock.
All right, yeah.
I highly recommend those. But yeah,
I'm more familiar with the Roger Waters solo stuff than I am with David Gilmour stuff.
Interesting. And see, I'm the opposite, because I think I've only listened to his most recent one, which is like, Is This the Life You Really Want or Really Deserve? I've never actually sat down and listened to Hitchhiking or Amused to Death. Like
Amused to Death is fantastic. I actually really like that. A lot of people don't.
Oh, okay.
It's very woke, and I'm quite alright with that kind of stuff. But it's very good. It's got Jeff Beck on guitar. So
okay.
It's very good.
I mean, you're winning me over with Jeff Beck. Like him alone, I'm like, okay, I'll give it a listen.
It's very good.
Oh, great! It
took me a while to get into it properly because it's like a similar structure to The Wall. It's got like a lot of smaller tracks within bigger tracks. It is good.
Yeah, I remember I've seen Roger Waters a couple of times live, and he would always play some of the tracks from his solo stuff, and I'm like, yeah, it's good, it's all right, but can we get back to some of the Pink Floyd stuff? Because, but yeah. That's right. Okay, let's move on to The Division Bell. And I'd love to hear your thoughts about this.
I love this album. I love this album so much. I got into it last year during the first lockdown because I was visiting the later Pink Floyd stuff and everyone was talking about Division Bell and I hadn't heard it yet. So I was like, you know what, I'll just give it a listen. Loved it, start to finish. I listened to it like every day for the rest of that week. I mean, High Hopes is just such a great song, and it's the one on Pulse, the live version. I think almost beats the studio version, but that's just such a beautiful album. Such a beautiful songwriting. It's just amazing.
Yeah, I completely agree. I love the Division Bell. When my family went on vacation when I was a teenager, I had a little bit of a. Here, I just need to. I clicked on the wrong. There we go. One more. Shoot. Sorry about that. Going back and forth. I have like 5 windows opened up on my computer. So yeah, we went on this family vacation and it was not a good vacation. And I brought 2 albums with me. The first one was Thick as a Brick and the second one was the Division Bell. And it really helped so much throughout my time within that. And I just fell in love with this album. High Hopes, I agree that as much as I love the studio version, the one on Pulse is far superior. But I love a lot of the smaller moments on this album, like Marooned.
Yeah, that's great.
Like, I remember listening to that when I was doing my master's degree, and it gave me such a great feeling. And I feel like now that Richard Wright is back into the fold, rather than being like a studio musician on this album, you can feel what made Pink Floyd so special back on this album.
Yeah, I mean, someone wrote in the live thing here, High Hopes made me cry. I'm with them there. I think the first time I heard that, I was brought to tears. For me, it was like, almost like the comeback album of Pink Floyd. Like, because it almost, parts of it kind of resemble the 70s stuff, but it's got that kind of early 90s, like late 80s, early 90s twang to it.
Yeah,
and just that blend is just amazing.
Yeah.
Perfectly executed.
Yeah, like What Do You Want From Me, I always felt like was a better realized version of the music that was found on Have a Cigar. It's got it's got that great groove, and I love that build to the big verse crescendo. Absolutely.
I might listen to that later.
Yeah, it's so I repeatedly come back to this album, and each time I get such a reward from that. So I have absolutely no problem putting this into the A category. I agree. It is probably the perfect comeback album.
Yeah, I think it couldn't have been done any better.
Exactly. Yeah. And then this comes to the last studio album from them that was released a couple of years ago. That I think there's only like 1 track off of this album that was like purely recorded for the album. The rest was bits and pieces from the Division Bell jam session that they had created. And much like Wish You Were Here, this was a massive tribute to Richard.
It's a great album. I haven't listened to it in a while. I got it as a birthday present. I think it was a birthday present last year. And I listened to the vinyl version, and I just thought it was just so good. Like it was just beautiful instrumental album. And yeah, I think that's as much as I can really say because I'm not familiar with it again. But from what I remember, it was just amazing. Yeah.
I'm in the same boat in that I love this album. I come back to it pretty regularly. It's a beautiful soundscape album, and I think it's a great way for the band to finish off their discography with. For me, it wouldn't feel right if they put out another album.
Yeah, I think that's a good cut-off point. But we've done this, now I don't think we can follow up.
Yeah, well, especially since like Roger Waters will never go back and Richard Wright unfortunately is no longer with us, that only really leaves us with Nick Mason and David Gilmour, and I think they're both pretty happy doing their own solo stuff.
Yeah, I mean, doesn't Nick Mason do the Souls Full of Secrets?
He does.
The Pink Floyd stuff, yeah.
Yeah, and I have the record, like the vinyl of it, and it's brilliant because he doesn't do anything that's like overly popular. Like he doesn't touch anything beyond Metal and Obscured by Clouds. Everything is before that.
Wonderful. That's great.
Yeah, and like if you haven't listened to the live album, I highly recommend it because it has, I think that section you were talking about in Adam Hart Mother, he plays that one section, and it's just it's Beautiful. I love it if you love that psychedelic stuff.
Yeah, I'll definitely check that out.
So for me, I would put Endless River into the B category,
Yeah, I put it there as well.
so that we have like a really nice kind of a structure there for all of our albums there. So great. That's all of their albums. We just whipped through them pretty quickly.
Yeah, I mean, it's Pink Floyd. It's a lot of good discussion that can be discussed.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And thank you so much for coming on and helping me
Oh,
rank all those. Always a pleasure having you on. Any kind of last minute last words that you want to impart to our viewers today?
um, good question. I mean, if you don't think Animals is the best Pink Floyd album, you need to go listen to it again.
I mean, yeah, it's not my favorite, but I will agree with you that it's probably their best. And
Yeah,
I think
I just love. I really got my dad into it because he was
Oh.
more of a early Pink Floyd generation. So when I played him Animals, I mean he'd had it obviously, but not really considered it that much.
Yeah.
He was like, oh, this kind of reminds me of like early stuff. I was like, yes, you're getting to like it early.
You're starting to see it. Yeah, I did the exact same thing with my dad because that was, I mean, it was in the box set that he got. And I remember listening. So if you're ever in like Canada and in Ontario, the big rock station at the time was Q107, and they had these record Sundays where they would literally just play a full side of an album. And they played the first side of Animals, which meant they just basically played Pigs on the Wing Part 1 and Dogs. Yeah, the DJ was like, oh, this is the kind of album that you don't necessarily play at a family gathering. And then the next day we had a family gathering, and of course I had to play it to prove him wrong. And my dad's like, oh yeah, this is actually a really good album. So yeah, it was good.
It's overlooked in my
It
opinion.
is. Yeah, and I think it just got a re-release too.
Yeah, the 5.1 surround sound is coming out soon, isn't it?
Yeah, because I know the vinyl is already out, like the remastering of it. It's not remixed as far as I know.
There's a new, like, I think a new box set or some sort of deluxe edition coming out.
Yeah.
There's been a feud between Roger Waters and Dave Gilmour recently
God.
about
There-
that.
Yeah, yeah.
Which I'm a bit more on the Roger Waters side of this one because he wrote a lot of that album, and they're kind of like, no, we're not letting you touch this. It's like, but he wrote most of it.
Right, yeah, I'm kind of with you. I am also a little bit, and this is interesting, because I'm a little bit more on David Gilmour, because like even though I will agree that it is more of a Roger Waters record than a David Gilmour record, I still feel like Roger Waters left Pink Floyd, and so it's like,
Yeah, I see what you mean. I mean, I'm more on the Dave Gilmour side as a whole.
But I also I completely see where Roger Waters is coming from, and I would have included because I think it's all about like the liner notes that some
Yeah.
yeah
It was really like that, yeah.
yeah, and I would have been like, yeah, just include it, whatever. It's a part of your project, and
Yeah, it's
yeah,
like,
go
you
for
were
it.
involved in it. Let's acknowledge history.
Exactly. Yeah. But yeah, they're going to be feuding forever, I think.
There is no chance of a Pink Floyd reunion anytime
Well,
soon.
yeah, and it was funny when somebody put that. I'm like, well, of course not. Like, a quarter of your band is, like, unfortunately dead, and the other ones, they're not talking to one another, so of course there's
Yeah.
not going to be. Yeah. Oh, boy.
I'm still surprised that they were able to. What is it, like 2000 in the early or mid 2000s? They got on stage and did the Live 8 thing.
Yeah, the Live 8. I was.
Happen.
Oh, yeah, I was surprised. I'm like, wow, like, all four of them are on here, and they're not trying to kill each other? This is great. So, yeah. Oh, boy. Well, thank you so much for coming on and chatting Pink Floyd. It's been a great time. If you haven't already, go and check out Niamh's YouTube. I've left the link down below to go and subscribe and show her some love. She's a rising star in the prog community, and I love all the positive energy she's bringing. So, and as I mentioned, she's encouraged me to showcase my collection a little bit more. So I think Friday I've got the prog tag that I'm working on. And if people want to do that, that'd be awesome. So, yeah, thanks for coming on.
No worries, I had fun. talking about Pink Floyd, as always.
Excellent. So everybody, take care. Have a great night. Let us know your own ranking of these albums, how we're wrong about that, all in the discussion down below. But keep civil, keep pleasant, and we'll catch you on the next live stream. Bye, everybody.
Bye.